I'm sure you know this moment. You're sitting in your office and you think, why am I actually here and what am I doing here? And that might have different reasons. Maybe you just had a really bad client call and didn't go the way you wanted, or maybe you had a really bad meeting and either you weren't really prepared or the others weren't really prepared. At least you didn't get the results you really wanted. Or, and that will be the reason why most of you will think, what am I doing here? Many will think, what am I doing here? Because once more, the senior leadership area did something where you think either you're on the wrong planet, or maybe you think, maybe I took the wrong tablets this morning. You just can't believe what just happened. And you think, why did this happen again? And this is what we're going to talk about today, how companies mix up advertising with values. They think that values are part of the advertising. And one warning just up front is that podcast, normally, as you know, I'm very keen on making my podcast not longer than 15 minutes. And by the way, because I received a couple of emails about that, some people asked me via email, why is there no interview? Last week, some people realized there was no interview. And yes, normally on Monday, there's the interview with someone. And on Tuesday, you get my episode. And on Wednesday, you got the expert letter. That's how it normally goes. You get content 3 times a week. 100% content, no advertising, all for free, and I'm happy to share that with you. But during Christmas time this year, during the end of the year of 2020, it's time to talk about a couple of substantial issues, and that's why we don't have an interview on Monday, not to get distracted. We are focusing on issues. At least last week we started, this week it's continuing, and we have one more next week before the more relaxed times begin at the end of the year. Just to let you know, this podcast most likely will be longer than 15 minutes, and it might be quite significantly longer. So the German version of this was longer than 40 minutes. So what am I talking about in this case? So I'm sitting here and I see all of these companies, especially during the end of the year, and they are advertising their special deals. And of course, we have COVID-19. They all want to have the best deal out there and tell you should buy this or that. And of course, it's advertising. And advertising is a huge industry. And advertising, when you think of people who work in advertising, you normally think of rather creative people who have great ideas, who also help a lot to make sales happen. And sales is a big industry. Sales brings in taxes, sales creates thousands and thousands of jobs. And of course, advertising is one part of marketing. And one part of marketing and sales is that you bring the product into the best situation, into the best place, into the spot that the client says, yes, I want to have that. So normally when you talk about creative people, many people would instinctively say these people most likely will be rather more left-winged. That's not always 100% true, although many of them are, and especially the ones you see often are, but you can't generalize it. But I just give you one example which happened this week, and I'm talking about W&V. W&V is a German advertising magazine, a very well-known one. They're W&V if you want to look it up and you're able to speak German, or you can just use the translate function. They have more than 125,000 followers on Facebook. It's a very well-known magazine. And in Germany, we now have a big discussion going on because we don't have the neutral articles like in English. We don't have the. We have der, die, das. Different articles, a male article, a female article, and the neutral, the neuter article. And of course, that leads to different adoptions of the words following. So of course, people say, what about the gender model? How do we practice inclusive language in a language that has male and female in the binary language model? And of course, you know the discussion even in the English language where you have the problem a lot less are escalating quickly. So I was positively surprised when I saw a posting from that advertising magazine where they said, no marketer, and of course I now tell you the English version, you can look the German version up. It happened on 10th of December at 3 minutes past 7 o'clock in the time zone I am now in, which is the London time zone. So the posting says that many people who work in advertising discriminate with their keywords because they deliberately exclude black people. And the posting below that, which is a picture, says no marketer would publicly admit that with their with their keywords they exclude black people. They would never publicly make that statement. So why do they do exactly that? And of course, you now think, interesting discussion. A very good point. Let's see what happens below there. And of course, I expected that some people make a point in favor of it and some might make a point against it. And when I look into the comments, of all the comments, there are 2 positive ones. The first one immediately puts in an article from a rather well-known conservative magazine, headline, "Gendering language makes discrimination even worse," and it went south from there, including, and that is the last comment that is online here, where someone says, what are people in advertising? Are we just floating around there with no goal? If advertising will not be understood in the future anymore, of course, marketers who are only advertising to their woke bubble will die out. And that is the logical consequence. The market decides. And the market does not want, sorry for the words now, I'm just reading out the comment. I translated from the German language. And before that, the person even said, that clients who are mentally normal are the ones who will decide, and the market decides. And the last phrase is, and I apologize in advance, the market does not want gender shit. I'm sorry for the words. I am just quoting what was written here by people who work in advertising. So it was one of these weeks where you think, what is going wrong here? And there are, of course, ups and downs, and at least some positive comments were made. Unfortunately, and that's something I have to say, when it comes to community management, of course, people can have arguments in favor of it or against it. Of course, inclusion is not up for negotiation. So when you have gender-tailored language and you refuse to do that, it simply means that you refuse to be inclusive and diverse, and that's pretty much a knockout criteria for your business. So when you do that, just leave the market. We don't need you. And by the way, you're going to die out anyway. You just don't know yet. And of course, the article, many negative aspects they put below that. But when it comes to community management, as soon as someone is openly swearing, and listen, V&V, I'm talking to the magazine now. When someone is openly swearing about this language, you have to delete these comments. You cannot tolerate open hate speech. And this was liked by 9 different people. When someone says, and I quote, "the market does not want gender shit," and even before that said that mentally normal clients, which means anyone who wants gender-tailored language is not mentally normal. Sorry, when you don't intervene there, I wonder what are the values that are lived by this magazine. And that is only one example of this week, because the topic of this podcast is that we talk about values and how values are misused for advertising. Maybe you heard, just to give you another example, that racism happened in the game, Champions League game between Paris and Istanbul, because the referee from Romania said that black guy over there, and the football player made an excellent point and say, you never say that white guy. You say that black guy. Open discrimination. People, by the way, both teams left the football pitch. Next day, the game was continued with different officials. And I'm still waiting for the moment where FIFA is saying we openly admit that we maybe didn't provide enough training, or the training was not really efficient, at least that they did something wrong. But for whatever reason, I'm only seeing very bland statements of, oh, it's all about inclusion and sport connects people, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Quite frankly, is anyone really surprised that FIFA, again, doesn't really live their values? Are you? Because I'm not. And when you think it can't get any worse, we have a case right now in Germany where people in a hospital say, in Germany, you have to take your paid holiday during the year, or you can put it into next year if your employer allows to do so. And people who worked first line in hospitals, you know, the healthcare workers, where we all did, you know, like, hey, yay, clap the guilt away, year 2020. These people, some of them now said they want to put their paid vacation to next year because they want to have a longer vacation as soon as the whole thing is a bit more calm with COVID-19, which might still take a while. And also, they want to travel somewhere or fly away. At least they don't want to stay in their rainy somewhere, either England or Germany or wherever they are. And multiple hospitals denied that to them. And when people said, but it's due to COVID-19, I can't travel. And then they said, COVID-19 is not a reason why you shouldn't take your vacation right now. So that means you have to leave in the midst of a pandemic, leave your colleagues behind with the bad conscience you have while you have to stay at home because it is legally an obligation that you take this vacation. And you can't take it next year because the senior leadership wants that you take it this year. I have no idea what kind of leadership is that. And I'm still wondering what's the idea behind it, except that you only want to look at productivity numbers. And when you think it can't get any worse from there, the Caritas, which is a church-owned organization, Catholic church-owned organization, they denied higher pay. Even the NHS raised the salary, even if it was a way too little raise and it didn't even catch up with inflation. And after all, healthcare workers, when you only count in inflation, still lost a lot of money during the last years. And honestly, I take off all my hats I have, if I had any, my deepest respect for what these people have done for us under the circumstances and leadership they have to work. And the Caritas, a Catholic church-owned organization, denies higher payments to their employees. Well, obviously, love thy neighbor ends at the profit zone, because when it comes to money, it's obviously more about love the money than live your values. Very well done, Caritas. Maybe not. And of course I could now quote that Donald Trump is hitting record numbers in the death row and he's executing one after another, that he made statements that people can be put into a gas chamber. I'm very sorry, I can hardly, and this is the moment where it really gets sort of emotional, I can hardly use these words, gas chamber. Of course, as you can hear by my charming accent, I am German. My grandfather survived concentration camp. And the President of the United States says we can execute people either by gas chambers or by firing squads in the year 2020. Oh, by the way, that's the same Donald Trump who ordered police to shoot the way free for him to do a bit of Bible waving in front of a church. And some people even like him for doing so. Honestly, if you do that, when it comes to values, you set the bar to a new record low. Unfortunately, many of us know that he will put the bar even lower before he leaves the office. And besides all that, when you think, is there anything else we can maybe lose our faith in? Oh, by the way, McKinsey in South Africa had to pay $40 million back due to a scandal they had. So one of these big numbers again. I mean, we had with Ernst & Young with the Wirecard scandal in Germany. We had a tech scandal where KPMG was involved. We have McKinsey involved in these kind of scandals in South Africa where they now admitted that they have to pay a fine. You honestly wonder, where are all these values of these oh so amazing companies when you look into reality? We have to wonder what went wrong. Because wasn't 2020 the year where we all overcome and where we see, or we all have to work together to make this happen because we have a global pandemic and we have to make life better for everyone and we have to stick together to do that. We can't do it on our own. Wasn't that the mantra in February, March of this year? Well, didn't last too long. Didn't even last a year. Didn't even last until the end of the year. Basically, it didn't last 9 months because the weirdos who were poster waving that COVID-19 doesn't exist and other nonsense started to do that about 6 months ago. So it didn't even last 90 days that people said, oh, all these amazing values thrown out of the window for your personal advantage and a bit of ego wanking. Sorry for the choice of words. I have to put it in a very direct way because otherwise people don't even listen to that anymore. So what is the problem? Because in this podcast, we always say we don't want to complain. We want to say, what are the problems? What are the reasons for the problems? And how can we do it better? So after I mentioned all of these different problems, what is the reason why this happens? And of course, there might be many reasons, so I can only give you a share of them. I don't claim that I know it all because that would be ridiculous. Motivational speakers do that. They normally have a very complex issue and give you a very simple solution with a 7-step plan. And then you apply the 7-step plan to find out it doesn't work. We're not doing that here. This is all about science and knowledge. So why are these problems frequently happening? So step number 1, there's a lot of pseudo activity, and this pseudo activity is only hovering around basically profit. People say, oh, diversity and inclusion, it is so important, it is so in the focus of our organization, and the human being is in the center of our attention. It's all about the human being, it's all about the client, it's all about the value because you pay our salaries, yada, yada, yada. And then One scandal later, you see, well, it was all a bit of a pseudo activity. And of course, at the end of this podcast, we talk about how to do it better. Also, people still mix up the factors you have to look into to run a successful organization based on sustainable leadership. So step number one, most of you know about KPIs. KPIs, key performance indicators. Some of you asked me what the German word, by the way, because I mentioned KPIs in podcast before. Well, in Germany, we also use KPIs. So most German professionals know the term KPIs. There is a theoretical German word, which is Schlüsselperformanzindikatoren. And yes, that is one word. And the reason why no one wants to learn the German language. So when you have KPIs, key performance indicators, please first, KPIs can help you to run your organization. You might know the phrase we learned back in the old days, you cannot manage what you cannot measure, which is true, but it's not all. Harvard Business Review had an own edition and said that metrics can mess up your whole organization because people mix up metrics with strategy. And suddenly you think, strategy is very hard to measure. And here's one very important aspect. When you want to measure something, be sure that you actually can measure it. I had way too many seminars, and I'll give you just one example because that was a moment where someone was really brave. They had one KPI, it was called the PI, the Productivity Index. And I asked, can I see the formula, how you get to, because it had to be in a certain corridor, not lower than that, not higher than that. And I asked, can I see how you get to that number? And they said, yeah, of course it's open. So here we are. And one part of the productivity index is if someone is productively working, which means either on site in the factory, in the office buildings, or from home, but they have to work. So for example, when you're sick, you're not productive. When you're on paid vacation, you're not productive. Or when you're pregnant, you're not productive. Or when you stay home because your child is sick, you're not productive. Or when your parents died due to COVID-19 and you took a week off to travel there, sort everything out and fly back, you're not productive. So not only is this a horrible way how to measure productivity, and a very old-fashioned way as well, it openly discriminates against the female gender, because in our world, so far at least, under the usual circumstances, which the majority of us knows, doesn't mean that it's impossible to change in the future, but at the moment, the normal cases, the standard cases, which most people perceive as the standard, is that only females can become pregnant. Only people of female gender can become pregnant, at least at the moment. Can change in the future, and I think most likely it will change in the future, but let's talk about where we are right now. And I asked openly, because I asked people in the room, doesn't that mean that you harm your team and that you actually get basically promoted, or you get a promotion when you don't take female team members on? And one guy raised his hands. I said, I openly admit I have done that in the past. And within 30 seconds, every single manager in the room and executive agreed they did the same. So first, hats off to the people who did that, because when you admit you've done something wrong, that's the point where you can start to change it. And admitting that you've done something wrong means you can do it better in the future. So thank you very much for the openness. Still, these KPIs are utter nonsense. I just put it into these straightforward words, because otherwise, if I would say, oh, they are debatable at best, you would think, oh, so we can debate about them. No, we can't. We are not going to debate about if we say it's not productive enough if someone becomes pregnant. Because when you look into demographics, we need children in society. That is nothing I'm going to debate with you, because you're sitting in some sort of controlling department putting up your own KPI. If you design your own KPI, it must be peer reviewed. You need valid and reliable, accurate and precise measurements, peer reviewed, to see that it's a scientifically proven appropriate number to run your organization on. And many just have an idea, put it out there, put it maybe to their closest group of friends, who of course all are of the same opinion, overlook the same issues, because you're all basically the same kind of people, just a couple of times human beings in the room. And then they say, here we go, let's put it into practice. And suddenly you realize, oh, that didn't go too well. And then you see that when Harvard Business Review says there's more than metrics, what about strategy? You know, strategy is a bit of a soft factor, isn't it? And then we have something which is called CSFs. You all know KPIs. Many of you won't know CSFs. And many of you, well, some of you think, oh, I know that because I come from IT. Because IT, and now buckle up, IT knows CSF for a very long time already, because ITIL, depending on how you pronounce it in the country you live in, it's either ITIL or ITIL, it's ITIL, IT, Information Technology Infrastructure Library. It's a process model which is scientifically proven by the Office of Government Commerce. It's a global standard how to run your IT properly. It's a good practice standard. By the way, it's often sold as best practice. Best practice doesn't exist. Best practice is marketing. I mean, when you say best practice, it means that's the best solution. There will be never anything better. And we all know in 10 years' time, there will be something better. So please say good practice. Stop to do all these superlatives, because when you have a superlative, it's the final stop. And when you have something better next year, it looks a bit ridiculous, quite frankly. So when you have ITIL or ITIL, no matter how you want to pronounce it, you have CSF's critical success factors. These are soft factors which you need, and these soft factors are oft openly ignored. I just give you an example. What about employee motivation? What about the atmosphere in your organization? What about company culture? What about the connection you have with your clients? What is the perceived value of your brand? What is your brand when it comes to perception of your future clients? How do different generations perceive your brand in different contexts? This is very hard to measure. I know that many people like to make everything measurable, but let's face it, you can't measure everything. And please accept that you can't, because otherwise life would be way easier. I am Northern German. When it comes to us, measure everything and life is perfect. But we cannot measure everything. And when I, as a Northern German, accept that, I want to hear your reason why you can't. Send me an email if you have a good reason or a good laugh. I'm happy about both. So, you don't have to focus solely or only on KPIs. Please also focus on CSFs, critical success factors. Another reason why these misbehaviors or misleading actions from senior management happen is because many people are very envious. And especially when you run a successful organization, the envy of people can be horrible for your brand. And I'll just give you an example. And as an example, I'm going to choose Volkswagen. And of course, you might now say, oh, I know Volkswagen. They had this massive emission scandal. Yes, they had. And they admitted they did it, and then they paid the fine. Although it was a bit of a shamble that they went to the highest court, always tried to find a settlement. But the person having the lawsuit against them wasn't interested in settling, so he won highest court. Catastrophe for the law firm representing Volkswagen here. So we had, and I'm now quoting an article from the Tagesschau, which is Germany's largest news show, which we have every evening on the largest German news channel, which is ARD, which is like BBC One for the Brits listening to this. It's a major TV channel. It's a public TV channel. There's no private interest in there. And on 1st of December at 3:34 p.m., I'm quoting, there are new ideas, new hints about illegal activities, illegal software in engines of Volkswagen. So immediately, some people went to court and, of course, tried to sue. And now we have a main problem here. Of course, with the brand of Volkswagen, you have a bit of a problem that people don't believe you anymore. But when you want to say there's an illegal software in your car, look, no matter how much you hate Volkswagen, and I'm not going to defend Volkswagen here, but you still need proof and evidence. So what happens is, and you can go on the website Volkswagen AG, which is, by the way, AG is PLC in Britain, so it's a publicly traded company, VolkswagenAG.com. It's a website where they made a public statement about the new claims, and 99% of all these lawsuits were lost. And the 1% that came through, by the way, less than 1%, were only because Volkswagen did something wrong, so they settled somewhere. It was basically an error of their own lawyers. So when you suddenly try to just talk down to someone because you don't like them personally, but you have no proof, no evidence, and no facts, here is the other side of the problem. You can, of course, not say something against senior management, board level directors, people who are often in power, and yes, they often are very influential and very wealthy. But when you have a go at them and you show up with no facts and you miserably lose, you make a joke out of yourself and you basically harm the discourse and the discussion we have. We cannot make leadership better and more sustainable when we say, oh, these people on top of all the wealthy people there are all bad because we know it all. That is not how you lead a discourse. This is like when you have that compares to when you, for example, say, you lost an election and then you sue in every single state in your country and you lose everywhere and still you say, no, it's a rigged election. You make a joke out of yourself. Just, of course, a completely arbitrary example. Or let's say, as a lawyer, you want to be accredited as in the highest court in your country, but you don't get selected. They simply say you're not good enough, or maybe they don't give you any reason at all. And then you sue yourself through every single instance and you lose every single instance. And still you say it's an unfair process. You make a joke out of yourself. You simply are part of the problem, not part of the solution. So when you want to criticize people in senior leadership, always go by facts. But by the way, when we talk about Volkswagen, I also have to comment on what Volkswagen did here, because the statement about the EA288, that's the type of motor they're talking about, was a bit debatable, let's say. First statement where they said, and that is the first paragraph, the aspect which is labeled B, so there's A, B, C, D, E. B said, you cannot simply have a claim against Volkswagen with no proof only because it's the brand Volkswagen. Perfect. Say that, full stop, have a good day, and then stop the website there. But I suddenly see the website is a lot longer. And then I see that, for example, Volkswagen says, only lawyers are profiting from these lawsuits and they make millions. By the way, Volkswagen, when people had a claim against you, where your CEO already admitted wrongdoing and people wanted to give back their cars, what did you do? You took a top 5 law firm in your country and put as many barriers in as possible until you lost miserably in certain cases, and then you had to pay them their money back. So first, don't talk down on lawyers in general. You cannot say a whole group of people is just bad due to their job. Second, you can't talk down on them when, by the way, you use them within your own organization and you even hire external people who do it for you, doing exactly that, making millions out of your lawsuit case. And when you talk down on lawyers, then don't have a track record where you used lawyers to prevent valid claims against you. And these claims were valid because you lost them. By the way, what they've done well on that website is they talk about, because that is aspect number 1, and then there's an aspect number 2 on the website. It's economy and techniques, and they explain what's happened in the motor, etc., etc. That is a perfectly valid paragraph. You explain what you actually do. And then there's the aspect number 3, which Volkswagen labeled integrity. And that was the moment where I quite struggled to put it into words, and that hardly ever happens. I mean, I am Northern German, so we prefer not to talk at all normally. You know how we are. But quite frankly, we have to say, when I saw that, I honestly thought someone just pulls the rug under my feet, because I thought, who is responsible and accountable for that paragraph? Because when you go to aspect number 3, it's still VolkswagenAG.com. That's one website. There's a statement about the EA288. Look it up. And so I'm not making, I'm basically quoting word by word, just translating from German language. It says, Volkswagen today is a better enterprise as it was before the diesel scandal. Oh, well, thank you, Volkswagen. Should we really be thankful for that? I mean, it can't be any worse, can it? How do you want to be a worse organization than being involved in a global fraudulent scandal about a software you implemented illegally into your car to trick people into wrong emission values? And by the way, the Americans found it out, not the Germans found it out. Of course you must be a better organization, a better enterprise. That goes without saying. Mentioning that under the headline integrity makes me question what's following. And unfortunately, it doesn't get much better afterwards. Because then you say, first you say, Volkswagen today is a better enterprise than it was before the diesel scandal. Well, fair enough, I think. Next phrase is, this positive change process cannot be reversed. Believe me, every change process can be reversed. You just have to try hard enough. And also, many journalists already uncovered that many different aspects of your change were simply that managers and executives from board level just switched seats within the Volkswagen Group. You have more than 500 brands under your roof of the Volkswagen Group, so you simply move managers, executive and decision makers from one company to the other. Some people came from an external point of view, which is good, which is a starting point, but many, even people who were involved, still are members of the Volkswagen Group. And it's completely understandable that people from the lower hierarchical point of view, people who are on a lower position in the hierarchical pyramid, are very frustrated with that. Because of course they say, why can these people be part in a massive global scandal that harmed Volkswagen significantly, and at the same time they keep their jobs? So the positive change process cannot be reversed, cannot be revoked. That of course is not true, and no one believes that. The next phrase is, in the area of entrepreneurial or company culture, we got a lot closer to our goal to change the company and have more integrity in the place. Well, when you got a lot closer to your goal, that is not very specific. When you reached 2% before the scandal and now you reached 15%, still great progress. However, still far away from the goal. And then I see there's a program called Together for Integrity, more than 660,000 people who work there. By the way, you use the binary gender model in your German statements. If you don't want to have the next problem, for example, a diversity issue, please use diversified language. It is not that difficult. In more than 700 companies, etc., etc., more than 550,000 people in 300 brands were reached out to. In more than 55,000 out of that in personal dialogue formats like workshops and meetings. That is a very general statement. 55,000 of them. By the way, Volkswagen has more than 600,000 people working for them in the Volkswagen Group. So that's significantly less than 10%. So more than 55,000 of them in personal dialogue formats like workshops and meetings. So you even count the internal meetings. It's a bit very general, and that makes it suspicious. And by the way, in my industry, because I am part of the training, education, consultancy industry, many of us, including me, had contact with the purchasing department from Volkswagen, and to say it in the most polite way possible, it was not a positive experience. It was not very appreciative. It was not looking for the best solution, but for the cheapest solution. And especially when it comes to appreciation and valuing services of others, Volkswagen did not give a good example to me and to many of my colleagues. Just one aspect you might think about. But it gets even better than that. The last aspect on that website, where they talk about integrity, they say, and I quote, "Meanwhile, there's a first-class compliance system installed." Amazing! Which one was there before? A second-class one? A third-class one? Maybe none at all? Does anyone check that? Does anyone read through these statements before they put them online? When you say, meanwhile, there's a first-class compliance system installed, it means the one before was obviously not first class. So it was substandard for a global enterprise. And then, of course, and then you add, in addition to that, we are on a good way to talk about existing problems more openly. There's a new code of conduct. So first, being on a good way, just imagine you work and then you have an issue. Maybe you don't sell enough, or your clients have many complaints about the quality of your product, and you have lots of your articles sent back and you have to refund, and your senior manager asks you, hey, how is it going with all these issues? And you say, we are on a good way. I just assume that the feedback might not be too positive for you. Still, we see that they write, we are in a good way. So maybe at least they see that it might take a while. That is the positive assumption I have here. They have a code of conduct right now, but then it says, and now I quote, in the area of group compliance, we have a completely new structure. The amount of people working there is doubled. And in brackets it says, and I have to say, I quote word by word, 750 jobs in 540 organizations. Again, 750 jobs. Well, it says planned jobs, but I assume they put them in place. I don't think they would openly lie here. 750 jobs in 540 organizations. Call me a bit critical, but that's about that's not even 1.5 jobs per organization. Building cars, putting a brand out there, purchasing, production, distribution, sales, everything of that is very, very complex. 1.5 jobs per organization, maybe a bit understaffed, or is it just me? And especially when we say 750 jobs in 540 organizations, you could still say, well, 1.5 jobs at least, or let's say basically it's 1.4 jobs per organization. But when we see the bigger picture, 750 jobs, according to the own numbers from Volkswagen in 2019, Volkswagen has 671,205 employees working for them. 750 jobs are the compliance for 671,000 people. That is 0.01% of your staff is doing compliance after you had a global scandal. We have to be unambiguously clear. That gives a very clear statement on what level you prioritize compliance in the future. And what is a good thing is at the end of this paragraph you say that you now have a hotline where people can make anonymous complaints or when they see something is going wrong. And they also state here in their report that it's getting a lot better. People can now anonymously call that telephone hotline 365 days a year, and they can talk to people there in 19 different languages, which is very good. Well done, Volkswagen. We have, of course, to mention what have they done well. That is very well done here. And then they add something which gives away, and I don't know if they knew what they did here. I often think very smart people must sit there. So I wonder, how do I find these statements on the open internet, on an official source of a stock exchange listed organization? This channel in 2017, only 15% of the people were giving a source, which means their name. And now it's 90%. So in the year 2020, 90% of the people name a source, so their name or their department, which is good. And no question, that is a good development. But let's just face, and that is something which gives away what the leadership problem of Volkswagen was in the year 2017. That's not decades and decades ago where the TV turns black and white. So in 2017, 85% of Volkswagen employees didn't dare to say their own name when they saw something went wrong. That tells you a lot about company culture. So I think that Volkswagen had the plan to say something really positive, but in my opinion, it would have helped a lot more if you make a statement and say, look, just because we're Volkswagen, you can't sue us without proof, which, by the way, is completely correct. You cannot, because that is how democracy works. When someone has done something wrong, of course, there are horrible crimes like murder, etc. There's a strong moral attachment to that as well. But when we have something where we talk about money and objects. A car is an object. This is hard to say for me as a German, of course, because we love cars. And I have to add something about cars in a minute, especially about Volkswagen and my personal experiences with Volkswagen in a minute. But when we talk about objects, money, so no one gets personally harmed, when you paid your dues and you admitted that you've done something wrong or you were sentenced, you pay what you have to pay, and after that, it's okay. That's how a justice system works. We want to re-socialize, we want to get people back into society, and we actually want to make sure that they will be a valuable member of society again. So when people were sentenced for something and they paid their dues And they also paid everything they had to, and they paid the fine and whatever else is just on a very low scale. When you park in the wrong place, you get a parking ticket, you pay the parking ticket, and then you're not guilty of wrong parking anymore. It's ticked off the list. Of course, Volkswagen, there was fraud involved, etc., but they were sentenced, they paid their dues, they took the cars back, they refunded the money, they did everything they had to, so we have to move on, because otherwise, as a society, we cannot always rethink about what might have happened years and years and years ago. I don't want to say that Volkswagen should not be held accountable at all, but I just give you an example from my industry. There's a motivational speaker in Germany named Jürgen Höller, and I don't like Jürgen Höller. Singing, dancing, clapping, the whole motivational. So I am Northern German. This is really not for me. If you enjoy it, good luck. In my opinion, what he delivers is of very low quality and not working, doesn't get you anywhere in life, but that's my personal opinion. Just make your own experience if you want to. I wouldn't spend a single penny on that. But in 2003, Jürgen Höller had to go to jail, and he's open with that. He speaks about that openly due to making wrong statements, taking money out of corporate accounts, and then, of course, to cause a bankruptcy. He was sentenced to 3 years in jail, and because he behaved well after a share of that time in the year 2004, in May 2004, he was allowed to leave jail again. But that, by the way, is a normal process. It is not unusual that when people behave well in jail, that they get released earlier. That is perfectly normal. It doesn't help us when we want to talk about topics and science and how we present different aspects of our industry in the public. It doesn't help us when we always say, oh, but 15, 16, 17 years ago, he was in jail. Yes, he was. He was in jail. He paid everything he had to. And now he's a member of society again. And he's running a business which you may or may not like. But what he does is not illegal. And we have to talk on a content level and not on, oh, remember what he did 15 years ago. He didn't kill anyone. There was a motivational speaker, I talked about that last week, James Arthur Ray. 2 people died in his sweat hut event. That's a different story. Jürgen Höller in Germany didn't kill anyone. So we really have to see what we can talk about right now, because when you want to hold your senior management to account, it is not helpful when you say, oh, I remember when 15 years ago that and that happened, or 5 years ago that happened, or whatever. When people did something wrong, and the justice system worked through it, tick it off the list, and then stick to the facts. That's how a democracy works. And I have to add one thing here, because people might wonder, why did I pick Volkswagen? I have a personal connection with Volkswagen, and a very emotional one. Because there's one thing, especially in the life of a German person, you never forget. Never. And that moment is the moment when you buy your first car. And my first car was a Volkswagen. Volkswagen, back in the days, was a very prestigious label. I was a student, so normally unable to afford a Volkswagen. No chance. But I was a referee, and my team lead, a referee team is always the referee, 2 assistants, the one with the flags, and then the 4th official. Back in my days, we had no 4th official. So it was just the referee, 2 assistants. And my referee team lead had a Volkswagen, wanted to get a newer Volkswagen, and offered his Volkswagen to me at a very fair rate. So I was super proud that I owned a Polo 4. It was everything I had. I invested a lot of money, best tires, best sound system, everything you do when you're 19 years old. You today feel a bit ashamed about it. Oh, well, no, not even a bit. You feel like a lot ashamed about what you've done back in the days, especially with a loud sound system, etc. But still, I have a very emotional connection to Volkswagen. When I remember the moment when I bought the car, when I registered it with the German official authorities that this is my car, got the insurance for it, purchased different parts for it, got the parts integrated into my system. This was my car. In Germany, my car is my home. I mean, in England, you say my home is my castle. In Germany, you say my home is my tank. My home is my car. And all the emotions I have with that car, the travels we did across all Europe, the trips we did for football, for sports, for parties, the nights when we slept in the car because the hotel we booked was overbooked and we couldn't afford the other one and the next one was 50 miles away and we were too tired. All these stories is all connected to Volkswagen. Many emotional, positive stories. And And it is quite sad to see that a brand goes down that way, especially when you see that it could be prevented. But I also, and that is part of my job, is that we don't only complain on this podcast, but say how to do it better. And a very important part of that is that we see both sides of the problem. It's not only the senior leadership. Of course, senior leadership is very important and probably most important, but also you have to say, when you approach them about a wrongdoing, stick to the facts and don't say that's what you've done a year or 3 years or 5 years ago. When they've done something wrong and they work through it, stick to what they can do right now, because otherwise you will always moan about, oh, everything was better back in the good old days. And let's face it, back in the good old days, many things were not better than they were today. So of course the question right now is, how can you do it better? So step number 1, 3 steps how to do it better. Step number 1, no justification when there is no public interest. Of course, Volkswagen, a significant share of Volkswagen is held by the Federal Republic of Germany. They receive taxpayers' money, so there is a public interest. They, of course, have to justify. But when someone says, I sue you to have illegal software in a motor, and you can prove by a court order that this claim is wrong, you don't have to make a statement which is 10 pages long where you can only make statements people will attack you on, as I just did, because these statements were sometimes, quite frankly, poorly written and gave a lot of areas to look into and to attack Volkswagen for another wrongdoing. When someone sues you and they lost, you say, we had a lawsuit, they lost, that is the reason, maybe some technical details, which you did, by the way. That's what Volkswagen did really well, that second part where they gave technical details, and that was it. But then suddenly you talk about integrity and give a bit of a dummy soft statement where you don't really know what does that mean, and then you say we have 750 people in the compliance department, and people see, wow, 750 people when 700,000 people work for you, and you wonder why they don't believe you really want to change. No justification when there's no public interest. So when you work for an organization when there's no public interest, of course, when you are the leader of a certain team and they question what you do, you should give them a reason. That's what good leaders do. Well, that's not a public statement. You don't put that on your website. When you are not of public interest and someone approaches you, you can answer them if you want to, but you don't have to. Many people, and that is a cultural aspect, are just envious and they are just looking for something they can hold against you. So step number 1 to do it better, don't start to make public statements where you think, oh, I could say this or could say that, because in many aspects simply say, you will do it wrong. You will do it wrong. So no justification when there's no public interest. Do it internally. And as soon as there's public interest or it's of interest for your clients, talk to them. But when there's no public interest, don't make public statements because it's pointless. In most cases, you only make statements where you, due to your blindness of your own organization, you don't see what is wrong in these statements, as I just demonstrated in this podcast. Aspect number 2. True sustainability means true management commitment is needed. You cannot simply say, oh, we want to be a very diverse organization, do something because the board has to take care of marketing and sales. That's not how it works. Then you simply assign someone to a certain task, and within an instant, people, when you, for example, want to say, oh, we protect the environment, look, we just had new batteries in our electric cars. Then someone will find out that these batteries are not really great for the environment, and they will say greenwashing. Or you say, look how diverse we are. We just have this LGBTQIA ally group in our organization. Immediately someone will ask, oh, by the way, how many LGBT people are on board level? And you say 0. And there you are again, pinkwashing. So when there's not true management commitment, you will fail. And there is no chance to get around it. I am quite frankly astonished how poor the understanding often of senior managers is that soft aspects of the brand, soft aspects of marketing, sales and product management, soft aspects of leadership today are at least equally as important, if not more important, than the KPIs you have. KPIs we already master because we are looking into that for decades and decades already. The CSF side talks about the critical success factors, which I talked about. These are the ones most organizations are not doing well. So be aware of the fact that maybe you look a bit more into that, because what also comes with it, true sustainability means true management commitment, including an appropriate budget. And I now give you a real world example. One of my colleagues, female colleague, who comes from theater, she was a leading figure in a very prestigious, very well-known, high-class theater in northern Germany, and a car-producing company. I'm not going to tell you which one. It was not Volkswagen. Asked her if for the female day they have, it was the Women's Power Day, how women get more voices heard in their organizations. They wanted to have her as a keynote speaker, and they then thought, because you have a theater background, could you do a bit of like cabaret, political comedy, that kind of stuff? And of course she said, yeah, I can do that. Can do a keynote, can do the political comedy. Sounds great. And then of course they said, so what's the fee you want to have? And she quoted a perfectly reasonable fee, which is around the 5,000 euros mark, which by the way is perfectly common and normal for a good keynote speaker. That is the usual fee for a true professional with the experience and knowledge you want to have from someone who is on stage. And then they said, oh, sorry, we can't pay that because, you know, all these diversity activities, they don't have high budgets. And we'll talk about that statement in 30 seconds, but she then asked, what is your budget? And they said, well, the budget is 300 euros. That is about 270 British pound for the Brits listening to this. That is about $350 for a keynote plus political cabaret. Preparation, travel, all included from a self-employed person. That is shameful. That's a disgrace even to say that. I never heard from senior leadership that they said something is very important and very urgent, but we don't put budget into it. I have never heard that they said, oh, we need great salespeople, but by the way, we don't have budget for them. I never heard that they said, we need great products, but we don't have money for the engineers. I never heard that they said, oh, we need great marketing, but we don't have money for TV ads. I never heard them say anything like that because they know that true management commitment comes with a budget. And as long as you say that all the ally statements you have, all the LGBT groups you have, all the women power groups you have, when all of them run along with little to no budget, the statement you make is basically I'm going to be very straightforward here. Basically, you don't give a damn. You honestly don't care. You want to have it on your agenda, so when someone asks, you can point your finger there and say, look, we have that ally group. Look, the people with the rainbow flag, like, you know, the gays and stuff. Yeah, that's diversity, you know, and all that stuff. Just ask them. True management commitment, and that's aspect number 2. Aspect number 1 was that no justification when there is no public interest, because it can only go wrong. Step number 2, true sustainability comes with true management commitment and a proper budget. You need to hire and pay professionals well, because otherwise you will fail due to the bad advice you receive. And the third aspect is that stop telling people that you have a change which cannot be revoked or overturned. So first, every change can be overturned. We had many organizations, they had a certain product idea, they then realized the product idea wasn't great and they changed. So they basically revoked the change completely, which they have done before. So that happens. So don't tell people these marketing phrases. They know it's not true. Also, and I quote Ilya Greshkovich here, who was not only a CEO by himself, was also a great keynote speaker on change. I highly recommend to book him for your conference. Really great speaker on change, a true keynoter, and you don't have many true keynoters. He's very well booked. So Ilya Greshkovich really is my recommendation for a great change management keynote, because he did all that by himself as someone who was in a senior leadership position at a very young age, by the way. And statements from him are, change is the new normal. And the skill to change will be a key skill in the future. And he's absolutely right with it. Dead right, to be exact. We don't have, and of course we all know these old models, that when you take up the old Levine model where you say, oh, we have to unfreeze the organization, then change and then refreeze. Yes, if you only take a more modern approach, like for example the approach from Kotter or Streich, you already know that your change management approach is outdated. Change is the new normal. Change is a state. Your organization will not get back to daily business where no change at all happens. Change is the new normal, as Ilya Greshkovich said, and that is simply what you have to deal with. But unfortunately, I often see senior management expecting change from others while at the same time they do not change at all. And that, of course, is not okay, because you may have heard of the phrase that you have to live the values the organization reflects on. If you don't live the values, we are, and that's the title of this podcast, how organizations mix up values with advertising. You simply think you can exchange them, or they are the same for you. And this is not how sustainable leadership works. So, summarized, aspect number 1 of how to do it better: no justification when there's no public interest. When you are in the focus of public interest, make a statement. When you are a person or legal entity of public interest, otherwise, if someone just puts you in the spotlight against your will, there is no reason why you need to make a statement. Many people only want to see you fall. So make a statement if you want it or not, but stick to the fact, no public interest, you don't have to make any statements. Because many people only want to put you in a bad light, and we have to deal with that. And by the way, if you approach senior management with reservations from the past, just leave that behind and focus on how can you do it better from now on. Because when they paid their dues for what they've done in the past, it is really time, even for us, and of course including us, trainers, speakers, consultants, people from operational and technical level, we have to overcome and say, how can we do it better? And of course, senior management has to live by the values. So step number 1, no justification when there is no public interest, and then there's no need. Step number 2, true sustainability means true management commitment, and that comes along with a true budget. And that also means step number 3, it leads straight to step number 3, change is a state, not a phase. It's not something which is time limited, which has a certain start and a certain end. Change is now a constant moment where you can say, that is something we need to implement constantly. And when you take care of all these aspects, your organization will have way better leadership, will be a more attractive employer, and all these soft skills are part of making your organization better. And also, because I know that senior management is very keen on it, will also be part of raising your profits and making your organization economically more viable and better. I wish you all the best in these challenging times. Thank you very much, of course, for listening to this whole podcast. I know it was a lot longer than it normally is, but in December, we really had some pressuring topics where it was very important for me that we talk about them properly. So at the end of this podcast, and I know we are in very challenging times in many countries right now, we restart the interviews in January. We will have some very pressuring issues in the podcast. Of last week we had that, this week we have it again, next week again, but then it gets more relaxed again. So at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much. So first, of course, I wish you all the best implementing everything I told you in your organization. And now we come to the point at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thank you very much for your time. Stay healthy.